Thank you so much for joining us today, Gloria. Can you tell us a little bit about the presentation that you're going to be sharing with us today?
Sure, Dana. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to review this presentation. The presentation was the one I did to the TNRD on April 22nd. It generated then on May 13th a motion from the TNRD to support the Ashcroft Slough Society conditionally, and that generated quite a few comments on Facebook. So this is just a clarification at the TNRD meeting. If you go online and see the video, there is no slides shown. We could not manage to share the screen. So this will give the opportunity for the public to also see those slides.
All right, let's get to it.
I wish to acknowledge first that I'm broadcasting from my home on the overlapping traditional territories of the Ntlakapa and Secwepemc peoples. It also happens to be on the border of the TNRD Area I, at the mouth of the Bonaparte River, and the village of Ashcraft. My name is Gloria Mertens, and I am the interim vice president of the Ashcroft Slough Society, and we are an advocacy group and represent the voice of those seeking access to the Ashcroft Slough. So we'll go on to the next slide and see what that slough area looks like. This is the Ashcroft Slough area. The slough is the foreshore area. That's the area that gets flooded and as the water recedes, forms warm pools and safe channels. Foreshore is public property and can be legally accessed by the waters of the Thompson River. And the Thompson River is designated a navigable waterway. Access over land today, however, requires crossing going under, over, or over the CN tracks, as well as property owned by the Ashcroft terminal. But it has to be remembered that that property is not used. It is not on the filed subdivision plans where the development is happening. It's on the other side of the CN berm. We'll look on to the next slide where we look at the properties themselves. So Ashcraft Terminal bought up all the heavy industrial land available in the community of Ashcraft, and it will be difficult for the village to accommodate any new industrial employers. They acquired these properties, and you'll see them that's the central area. The little blue square on the left is the Area I residence, and further up the road, you'll see the beyond the Ashcraft terminal lands, which is Coppers. So in the middle, that is the land, and they acquired those lands over 20 years ago. You have to remember that this is lots of land. There's over 600 acres of land. That's a substantial amount. That's more than the entire village of Ashcraft. So they brought those lands, but during that time, they had not had any public presence except this last year. So what do I mean by that? That's they didn't regularly sponsor community events. They didn't establish any advertising space in the local paper. They didn't donate funds for scholarships or buy wreaths for the Legion's annual ceremony. There was no team sponsorship. And remember that they had received over $14 million of taxpayers' money. So doing business in a small town, and they're very proud of saying that they have done business for the last 20 years. So doing business in a small community is more than just making a shrewd investment. And dedicating, finding the pulse of the community and dedicating those slough parkland areas would, at the time the subdivision was divided, would have been a gesture of good corporate citizenship. We'll take a look at the historic area now on the next slide. So these are the original two Crown grants, LIG4 and lot number 424. They are the Crown grants that make up most of the industrial land of the Ashcraft terminal. Now you'll see that there was a road clearly established on the plan, and this is very important. Crown grants also reserve to the province the right to take up to 1/20th of the grant for roads and other public works. So the decommissioning, when they put up the fence or the gate, that was a contentious issue for locals. Another issue, and you'll see on the left-hand side, is the fact that the village of Ashcraft has not acknowledge the heritage value of the slough area. Now, many people have stories of growing up on the slough. There's archaeological evidence of the site that First Nations used this area for millennium. All kinds of artifacts have been found on the site. Also, the founding fathers, this is where they first preempted these lands and started productive agricultural use of the lands. They allowed, those original owners allowed the public to cross private land and to access the slough in order to partake in social and recreational activities such as curling, skating, and swimming. And of course, there was and has been common use of the Ashcroft Slough before CN arrived, 30 years before that, and then after the arrival of CN in 1915. So common law use has continued until it was gated last year. We'll look at the next slide. And the theme that I'm trying to get here is that the community is owed something substantial, and that something substantial is access to the Ashcroft Slough. So this just shows you that the Ashcroft terminal has on its website that it's environmentally sound with Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency certificate and approval. But the CEA archives show that an environmental assessment was triggered in 2010 because of Transport Canada's financial assistance. You'll see how much money there on the left-hand side. It also shows that the completion of that assessment, that environmental assessment, was dropped when the new act came into effect in 2012. They just basically dropped it. And at the provincial level, there also was no environmental review done. There is criteria for marine ports, but not for inland ports. And even at the local level, there was no development permit issued. And these properties have hazardous slopes. And as hazardous slope designation, it makes it a development permit area. So they're supposed to have gotten a development permit. Along with that, usually what happens is there's a servicing agreement. Now, there are no services out at Ashcroft Terminal, but there is the road, and that road is used by a lot of heavy traffic. It could have, had they made a servicing agreement, they could have addressed some of the extensive wear and tear on the public roads and maybe enhanced some safety measures for pedestrians, such as a walkway. There's no records found on about any public hearing specific to the subdivision, the land use proposal, or the rezoning of the agricultural lands. Now, First Nations bands in the area did request meaningful consultation with Ashcroft Terminal, and we believe that those talks did occur and that some agreements were put in place, but the Society has not been able to confirm that. We'll go on to the next one, see what concerns we have. So because there wasn't any environmental assessment, there are a bunch of concerns that we had. I'll list a number of them. First of all, there's been a massive amount of soil disruption and has continued, pardon me, and continues to occur. And that was based on a permit based on a 1979 soil removal bylaw. That bylaw could not have anticipated such a large scale development. 2 major gullies have been filled on the hazardous slopes area of the properties, likely affecting the natural water courses and stimulating all kinds of weed growth and a change in the natural flora and fauna. There were no biological survey of plants or animal species that was shared with the community, nor was there consideration of a wildlife corridor given that we know of for animals to access the water. So it's very hard to access the water just anywhere on the Thompson River, and this was one place that water could be accessed at. Other concerns that we had were the handling of dangerous goods, including blasting material for mining and construction and hazardous gases and liquids, a non-unionized workforce, the impact on the local firefighters and the emergency response, and the potential for movement of contraband or restricted goods through container unloading and restuffing. We'll look at some other concerns in the next slide. So they did have to make an environmental screening support document. And in that document, there is one small paragraph about its impact on the local community. Most of the report focuses on cost savings for clients and lower mainland communities and the province from lower supply chain costs, reduced road maintenance, and improved road safety. But there's no mention of costs being offloaded onto the local community or of the nuisances displaced onto the local community. So Ashcraft Terminal has reported many times that the closest residential neighborhood is 1.7 kilometers distance. Well, I live at the mouth of the Bonaparte, directly across from the Ashcraft Terminal. That's a distance of less than 250 meters. But the nuisances created by the operations are felt throughout the community. There is dust billowing that impacts wear and tear on machinery, as well as the health of all living things. There has been light egress, and that's particularly disruptive to migrating birds and other wildlife, but certain neighborhoods also get a lot of that light. There's more high-pitched rail squeal from the increased rail traffic. And of course, there's increased traffic along the public roads and at the bridge intersection. We'll go on to the next slide. So in 2013, a delegation came before council with regards to creating a riverine pathway down Evans Road to accessing the Ashcroft Slough. The mayor stated that it was the intention of Ashcraft Terminal to provide access to the slough area. And another councillor, now the current MLA, suggested that the village would conduct a study of the area, but these are broken promises. Even the current council today did not support the Ashcraft Slough Society for a grant in aid to go towards a feasibility study or to go towards the recording of stories of old timers. They did not support being an umbrella organization for us to receive funds and move forward with our advocacy. And they did not resolve to write a letter of support for our purpose, which was an attempt to get safe, legal pedestrian access to the slough. So it really was nice to hear when the TNRD did make that motion and support that purpose. We'll go on to the next one. So in last April 2020, the gating of the assumed public road, remember this was a road everybody used and thought it was public, prompted a petition by a young activist, and it got a substantial response. As you can see, 733 supporters, and that was within, I think she said 2 or 3 weeks that it was up. The Ashcraft Terminal did respond, and they set up a working group, but only three were community members that were non-aligned with the company. Basically, the community members were outnumbered by a margin of 2 to 1, and when consultants were present, 3 to 1. And they did work on a consensus basis, so everybody had to agree before they would go on. The group dissolved in September, so there hasn't been any communication with the Ashcroft Slough Society since that time, and the Ashcroft Slough Society incorporated right after that dissolution. The recommendations of the working group were never publicized, and on the right-hand side, you'll see 2 of their recommendations. They're in picture format. One was to develop a boat launch in the boat launch area, and the second one was to develop more enhanced trails, which both the group did support, I think unanimously, the boat launch area, and with more reserve for the enhanced trail building, because at that time, the council had not made any movement at all on getting a trail master plan. But they have now moved forward on putting together a trail master plan, and they do have a working group towards that. So although the corporation may be considering now and has been working hard, I think, to try to get a public profile on how it might give back to the community, there isn't any public engagement involved in that process. So we'll go on to the very last one. And I did make the presentation to the TNRD. The TNRD is, I think, 11 municipalities and something like 10 area representatives. They supported unanimously the private development of the inland port in May 2007, and afterwards continued its support through advertising and letter campaigns. Now remember, this is a private business. They got a lot of taxpayers' money. we believe the TNRD owed something to the community in response. So we were looking for a balanced support for a private developer whose only interest is in profitable development. I mean, that's what businesses are, and that's what businesses do, versus the public that had no consideration from the board, and in fact, for a historical community amenity. And I must say, I was really quite saddened when my area I rep voted against that motion. And the last one I just want to say, it's just a repeat of the first. This is our website. If anybody is interested in looking us up and seeing what we're all about, it has some information on our website. And I want to say also that the Ashcroft Slough Society supports the expansion of the inland port. We believe, though, that economic development must go hand in hand with community well-being and livability. There's now lots of studies that show blue health is so important. Green spaces and blue spaces, which is on the water, are so important to our mental health and our well-being. And it's our opinion that this access to the slough is safe, feasible, desirable, and can be done, and it's owed to our community. I thank the board for their attention, and that was the end of my presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Gloria. That is a great presentation. And just as we wrap up this presentation, there was a little bit of confusion regarding the last TNRD board meeting. I know that there was some technical issues on the sides of all the board members. Now, we saw that Director Roden revised the letter from the Slough Society. Is that correct, or was it just she was presenting the letter that you guys had written, and then that's when the 4 directors opposed, and then also...
No, what happened, Dana, was we, in our April 22nd, there was a question, well, what is the Ashcraft Slough Society looking for? And I basically said, we're looking for a balance of representation. And I'm sure that you can be creative and figure that out. And I did mention what the school board had done for us. And they were just encouraging the 2 parties to get together, to talk, and to attempt to come to some kind of resolution with regard to accessing the slough. And what happened on May 13th was simply a resolution, a motion that the board came up with, and they allowed Mayor Roden to present that motion, and she worded it with the condition of the full endorsement of CN and the Ashcraft terminal. So okay. There was no, there was no rewording or anything. She just presented a motion, and then there was no discussion. I had sent their secretary had sent all the information to each of the directors because, as I mentioned, there was some confusion when I presented the slideshow, so that they got the slides, and they probably looked it over, read it, and made a decision on their own. And when the vote came, there was no discussion. They just voted, and 4 voted against, and everybody else voted for.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gloria. What's the next step for the Ashcroft Slough Society?
Well, we'll continue to make research. We'll continue to try to outreach to First Nations groups and others within the community as well. We'll await, any movement from Ashcraft Terminal to talk with us and to hash things through. I mean, that's what we're interested in.
All right.
I'd like to just, you don't know the things that are possible until you don't know that they're impossible.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gloria.
Thank you, Dana.